We're live!
Yay.
Hello everybody, we're live from the Old Thomas Cook in Horsham. We are hosted by Hypha Studios, who pair creatives with empty spaces like the Old Thomas Cook in Horsham.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be reading some Cavendish by candlelight. We're going to be reading Margaret Cavendish's The Blazing World. And we're also going to be chatting about how we might adapt it to be an opera, an experimental opera, might I add.
Yeah.
But we might find out by the end of the stream that it's a terrible idea and we might not do it. But also,
we might find out that it's a terrible idea and we will still do it.
That's more likely. So yes, welcome to Cavendish by Candlelight. This could take, I think it's going to take about 5 hours, you know. We'll see how we go. Drop in, drop out, see how you feel. Yeah. So we're going to start. Wait, should we talk a bit about who Margaret Cavendish is and what The Blazing World is? Yeah, share. You share on your social. I'll talk. You share. If you're here, share on your social media. Get some pals together and watch Margaret Cavendish. So Margaret Cavendish wrote this book in 1666. Is that correct? I believe it's correct.
Great Fire.
Yes, it might be a response to the Great Fire. I don't think it is a response, but I think it might be a happy accident. No, that is true. Yeah. It is true. So she wrote it in 1666, and it is sort of a forerunner to sci-fi, which is great. Great to see women in science. You know, big up women in science. So it's sort of that. She did a lot of poetry about the atom, which Fintan knows a lot about, and I know not so much about.
I wrote a song cycle a few years ago based on her poems, and it was my big dissertation uni project. And then a year later, I was talking to my sister about it, and it turns out part of her English literature dissertation was also on Margaret Cavendish, and we didn't even know. Crazy!
That's very sick.
Rock on.
Rock on. She's also the Dutch. Well, she's not anymore. She's very dead. But she was the Duchess of. This is a chair, by the way. It's quite a noisy chair. The Duchess of Newcastle.
That she was.
Yeah, she was. She actually was, which is great because you're, from around there.
I'm assuming I think she married it. She wasn't a descendant. I think she married into the Percy family. The Percy family being the big aristocracy up there. But don't quote me on that. Don't know that that's true. But I think
Google it.
From my reading,
Google it, dear viewers. Google it.
Research.
Did I share on my socials? I did.
I don't know. I just have.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's quite linguistically challenging.
It's really, really hard to read, like really, really difficult. So we're going to try our best.
It's great when you both got a cold as well, isn't it?
Yeah, we don't have the old coronavirus, but we do have a little bit of a cold.
The old cold.
Which is fine. And you're just going to say it live now. Those exclamation marks. We love to see it. Yeah. What am I saying? Yeah, it's really hard to read, but we're going to try our best. It's not that well written. And Virginia Woolf actually said that she was a terrible writer. So take from that what you will. I trust her. So, anything else to say about Margaret Cavendish in this novel?
I think it speaks for itself.
It definitely speaks for itself in a way. Maybe we should begin. So this is the Blazing World.
Let us know that the audio is okay as well.
Let us know if we have any tech issues, because we just won't know because we're here. What can I say? So yeah, should we commence?
Yeah.
Cavendish by Candlelight in the Old Thomas Cook. Right. So the description of a new world called the Blazing World. A merchant travelling into a foreign country fell extremely in love with a young lady, but being a stranger in that nation, and beneath her both in birth and wealth, he had it's going on already. He could have but little hopes of attaining his desire. However, his love growing more and more what's that word?
This is a great start. More and more vehement.
Vehement. Anyone know what that means? Upon him, even to the slighting of all difficulties, he resolved at last to steal her away, which he had the better opportunity to do because her father's house was not far from the sea, and she often using to gather shells upon the shore, accompanied not with above 2 or 3 of her servants. It encouraged him the more to execute his design. That was all one sentence.
Yeah, that sets the tone for the rest of the show.
Thus coming one more time with a little light vessel, not unlike a packet boat manned with some few seamen, and well victualled with, for fear of some accidents which might perhaps, that's not a word we can use anymore, their journey to the place where she used to repair, he forced her away. But when he fancied himself the happiest man of the world, he proved to be the most unfortunate, for heaven frowning at his theft raised such a tempest as they knew not what to do or whither to steer their course, so that the vessel, both by its lightness and the violent motion of the wind, was carried as swift as an arrow out of the bow towards the North Pole, and in a short time reached the icy sea, where the wind forced it amongst huge pieces of ice, but being little and light, it did by assistance and favour of the gods to this virtuous lady so turn and wind through these precipices as it is silent and skilful mariner. But alas, knowing whither they went, nor what was done, and not being provided for so cold a voyage, were all frozen to death. The young lady only, by the light of her beauty, the heat of her youth, and protection of the gods, remaining alive. Neither was it a wonder that the men did freeze to death, for they were not only driven to the very end or point of the pole of that world, but even to another pole of another world, which joined close to it. So the cold, having a double strength at the conjunction of these two poles, was insupportable. At last, the boat still passing on was forced into another world, for it is impossible to round this world's globe from pole to pole, so as we do from east to west, because of the poles of the other world joining to the poles of this, do not allow any further passage to surround the world that way. But if anyone arrives to either of these poles, he is either forced to return or to enter into another world. And lest you should scruple at it and think, if it were thus, those that live at the poles would either see two suns at one time, or else they would never want the sun's light for 6 months together, as it is commonly believed, you must know that each of these worlds, having its own sun to enlighten it, they move each one in their peculiar circles, which motion is so just and exact that neither can hinder or obstruct the other, for they do not exceed their tropics. And although they should meet, yet brightness of our sun, and although they should meet, yet we in this world cannot so well perceive them, by reason of the brightness of our sun, which being nearer to us, obstructs the splendour of the suns of the other worlds, they being too far off to be discerned by our optic perception, except we use very good telescopes, by which skillful astronomers have often observed 2 or 3 suns at once.
That was the opening paragraph.
That's one whole paragraph. So what's just happened? So woman's on a boat, and we've heard a load about the poles of the world, right? That's all we know right now.
Yeah, and all of the crew except her died, because by the light of her beauty and the heat of her youth, the protections of the god made her remain alive.
If you're pretty, you'll stay alive, apparently. Wow. Okay, on we go. But to return to the wandering boat, here we go. And the distressed lady. So we're back in the plot now, she, seeing all the men dead, found small comfort in life. Their bodies, which were preserved all that while from putrefaction and stench by the extremity of cold, began now to thaw and corrupt, whereupon she, having not strength enough to fling them overboard, was forced to remove out of her small cabin upon the deck, to avoid that nauseous smell, and finding the boat swim between 2 plains of ice, as a stream that runs betwixt 2 shores, at last perceived land, that covered all with snow, from which came walking upon the ice-strange creatures in shape like bears, only they went upright as men. Those creatures coming near the boat catched hold of it with their paws, that served them instead of hands. Some 2 or 3 of them entered first. And, sorry, what's going in where?
Bear-like creatures have come to get her from the boat.
Right.
That's what I got from it.
Right. That served them instead of hands. Oh, pause. Okay. Some 2 or 3 of them entered first, and when they came out, the rest went in one after another. At last, having viewed and observed all that was in the boat, they spoke to each other in another language, which the lady did not understand, and having carried her out of the boat, sunk it together with the dead men. So the boat is now sunk, dead men, she's alive.
This is a dramatic opening scene.
The lady now finding herself in so strange a place, and amongst such a wonderful kind of creatures, was extremely stricken with fear.
You would be.
Yeah, and could entertain no other thoughts, but that every moment of her life was to sacrifice to their cruelty. But those bear-like creatures, how terrible soever they appeared to her sight, yet were they so far from exercising any cruelty upon her, but rather they showed all civility and kindness imaginable. For she, being not able to go upon the ice by reason of its slipperiness, that's great, by reason of its slipperiness, they took her up in their rough arms and carried them into the city, where instead of houses they had caves underground. And as soon as they entered the city, both males and females, young and old, flocked together to see this lady, holding up their paws in admiration, at last having brought her into a certain large and spacious cave, which they intended for her reception. They left her to the custody of the females, who entertained her with all kindness and respect, and gave her such victuals as they were used to eat. But seeing her constitution neither agreed with the temper of the climate, nor their diet, they were resolved to carry her into another island of a warmer temper. They carried her all the way to another island, in which were men like foxes, only walking in an upright shape, who received their neighbours the bear men with great civility and courtship, very much admiring this beauteous lady, and having discoursed some while together, agreed at last to make her a present to the emperor of their world, to which end, after she had made some short stay in the same place, they brought her across the island to a large river, whose stream ran smooth and clear like crystal, in which were numerous boats, much like our fox traps, in one whereof she was carried, some of the bear and foxmen waiting on her. And as soon as they had crossed the river, they came into an island, where there were men which had heads, beaks, and feathers like wild geese. Only they went in an upright shape, like the bear men and the foxmen. Their rumps they carried between their legs. Their wings were of the same length with their bodies, and their tails of an indifferent size, trailing after them like a lady's garment. And after the bear and foxmen had declared their intentions and design to the neighbours, the geese or birdmen, some of them joined to the rest, and attended the lady through that island till they came to another great and large river, where there was a preparation made of many boats, much like the bird's nest, only of a bigger size. And having crossed that river, they arrived into another island, which was of a pleasant and mild temper, full of woods, and the inhabitants thereof were satyrs, who received both the bear, fox, and birdmen with all respect and civility. And after some conferences, for they all understood each other's language, some chief of the satyrs, joining to them, accompanied the lady out of that island to another river, wherein were very handsome and commodious barges. And having crossed that river, they entered into a large and spacious kingdom, the men whereof were of a grass-green complexion, who entertained them very kindly, and provided all conveniences for their further voyage. Hitherto they had only crossed rivers, but now they could not avoid the open seas any longer, wherefore they made their ships and tacklings ready to sail over the island, where the emperor of the blazing world, for so it was called.
Oh, that's dramatic. The emperor of the blazing world, for so it was called.
Kept their residence. Very good navigators they were, and though they had no knowledge of the lodestone or needle or pendulous watches yet, which was as serviceable to them, they had subtle observations and great practice, insomuch that they could not only tell the depth of the sea in every place where there were shells of sand, rocks, and other obstructions to be avoided by skillful and experienced seamen. Besides, they were excellent augurers. What does that mean?
No idea.
Cool. Which skill they counted more necessary and beneficial to them than the use of compasses, cards, watches, and the like. But above the rest, they had extraordinary art, much to be taken notice of by experimental philosophers. And that was a certain engine which would draw in a great quantity of air and shoot forth wind with a great force. This engine, in a calm, they placed behind their ships, and in a storm before, for it had served against the raging waves, like cannons against a hostile army or besieged town. It would batter and beat the waves in pieces, were they as high as steeples, and as soon as a breach was made, they forced their passage through. in spite even of the most furious wind, using 2 of the engines at every ship, one before to beat off the waves and another behind to drive it on, so that the artificial wind had the better of the natural, for it had a greater advantage of the waves than the natural of the ships. The natural, being above the face of the water, could not without a downright motion enter or press into the ships, whereas the artificial with a sideward motion did pierce into the bowels of the waves. Moreover, it is to be observed that in a great tempest they would join their ships in battle array, when they feared wind and waves would be too strong for them. If they divided their ships as they joined as many together as the compass or advantage of the places of the liquid element would give them to leave. For their ships were so ingeniously contrived, they could fasten them together as close as a honeycomb, without waste of space, or being thus united. Nor wind nor waves were able to separate them. That's the first full stop I've seen in minutes. Where am I? The emperor's ships were all of gold, but the merchants and skippers of leather. The golden ships were not much heavier than ours of wood, by reason they were neatly made, and not required not much thickness. Neither were they troubled with pitch, tar, pumps, guns, and the like, which make our wooden ships very heavy, for they are not all of a piece, yet they are so well soldered. There's a footnote there, but I don't know how to get to them. That there were no fear of leaks, chinks, or clefts, and as for guns, there were no use of them, because they had no enemies but the winds. But the leather ships were not altogether so sure, although much lighter besides, they were pitched to keep out water. Having thus prepared and ordered their navy, they went on in despite of calm or storm, and though the lady at first fancied herself in a very sad condition, her mind was much tormented with doubts and fears, not knowing whether this strange adventure would tend to her safety or destruction, yet she being withal of a generous spirit and ready wit, considering what dangers she had passed, and finding those sorts of men civil and diligent attendants to her, took courage and endeavoured to learn their language, which after she had obtained so far, that partly by some words and signs she was able to apprehend their meaning, she was so far from being afraid of them, and she thought herself not only safe, but very happy in their company, by which we may see that novelty disposes the mind, but acquaintance settles it in peace and tranquillity. At last, having passed by several rich islands and kingdoms that went towards paradise, which was... What did I say?
That.
Okay.
You changed the meaning.
Okay. At last, having passed by several rich islands and kingdoms, they went towards paradise. Yeah, that does. Which was the seat of the emperor, and coming in sight of it, rejoiced very much. The lady at first could perceive nothing but high rocks, which seemed to touch the skies, and although they appeared not of an equal height, yet they seemed to be all one piece, without partitions. But at last drawing near, she perceived a cleft, which was which was a part of those rocks, out of which she spied coming forth a great number of boats, which afar off showed like a company of ants, marching one after another. The boats appeared like the holes or partitions in a honeycomb. This is the second time she's described something like honeycomb. And when joined together, stood as close. The men were of several complexions, but none like any of our world. And when both the boats and ships met, they saluted and spake to each other very courteously, for there was but one language in that world. But earlier they said that they all spoke different languages, but they could all understand each other. Are we in a different world now? We were travelling to the Blazing World.
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah. So there were loads of languages before, but they could all understand each other. And now they're in one world where they all speak the same language. We've left the bear men and the...
I think they're on the ships with her.
Right.
Oh no, she's on the ships with the green men, isn't she? Continue.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
I'm sure all will become clear.
I don't think anything's going to become clear ever. Where am I? Oh, yeah. So there was but one language in all that world, nor no more but one emperor, to whom they all submitted with the greatest duty and obedience, which made them all live in a continued peace and happiness, not acquainted with other foreign wars or homebred insurrections. The lady, now being arrived at this place, was carried out of her ship into one of those boats at this place, was carried out... What? one of those boats, and conveyed through the same passage, for there was no other, into that part of the world where the emperor did reside, which part was very pleasant and of a mild temper. Within itself was divided by a great number of vast and large rivers, all ebbing and flowing into several islands and of unequal distance from each other, which in most parts were as pleasant, healthful, rich and fruitful as nature could make them, and, as I mentioned before, secure from all foreign invasions, by reason there was but one way to enter, and that like a labyrinth, so winding and turning across the rocks, that no other vessels but small boats could pass, carrying not above 3 passengers at a time, on each side along this narrow and winding river. There were several cities, some of marble, some of alabaster, some of agate. Agate? What's that? That's a thing, isn't it?
It's a substance.
That's a thing we should know.
Really know it, though.
Some of amber, some of coral, and some of other precious metals not known in our world. All which, after the lady had passed, she came to this imperial city named Paradise, which appeared in form like several rivers, several islands, for rivers did run betwixt every street, which together with the bridges, whereof there was a great number, were all paved. The city itself was built of gold, and their architectures were noble, stately, and magnificent, not like our modern, but like those in the Romans' times. For our modern buildings are like those houses which children used to make out of cards, one story above another, fitter for birds than men.
Wow, shade of the enlightenment architects.
But theirs were more large and broad than high. The highest of them did not exceed 2 stories, beside those rooms that were underground, as cellars and other offices. The emperor's palace stood upon an indifferent ascent from the imperial city, at the top of which ascent was a broad arch supported by several pillars which went round the palace and contained 4 of our English miles in compass. Within the arch stood the emperor's guard, which consisted of several sorts of men, and we've not heard of a woman yet, have we?
Except her.
And every gate was of a different fashion. The first, which allowed a passage from the imperial city into the palace, had on either hand a cloister, the outward part whereof stood upon the arches sustained by pillars, but the inner part was close, being entered through the gate. The palace itself appeared in its middle like the aisle of a church, 1.5 miles long, 0.5 mile broad. The roof of it was all arched and rested upon pillars, so artificially placed that a stranger would lose himself therein without a guide. At the extreme sides, that is, between the outward and inward part of the cloister, were lodgings for the attendants, and in the midst of the palace the emperor's own rooms, whose lights were placed at the top of every one. Because of the heat of the sun, the emperor's apartment for state was no more enclosed than the rest. Only an imperial throne was in every apartment, of which the several adornments could not be perceived until one entered, because the pillars were so just opposite to one another that all the adornments could not be seen at once. The first part of the palace was, as the imperial city, all of gold. When it came to the emperor's apartment, it was so rich with diamonds, pearls, rubies, and the like precious stones that it surpasses my skill to enumerate them all.
It's the first time she said, nah, I couldn't possibly go into detail.
She's so ridiculous, but I love her. Where am I? Amongst the rest, the green diamonds.
You skipped one.
Amongst the rest, the imperial room of state appeared most magnificent. It was paved with green diamonds, for in that world all are diamonds of all colours. That's great.
They couldn't just be emeralds.
No, they're not emeralds. Definitely not. They're diamonds. Green diamonds. I like that she knows that they're green diamonds. What am I saying? Diamonds so close, and in such a matter that they appeared most glorious to the sight. Between every pillar was a bow or arch of a certain sort of diamonds, the like whereof our world does not afford, which being placed in every one of the arches in several rows, seemed like so many rainbows of several different colours. The roof of the arches was of blue diamonds, not sapphires, and in the midst thereof were the carbuncle. There's another footnote there, don't know what it's going to say, because we're all at the end, can't bother to skip. Which represented the sun. The rising and setting sun at the east and west side of the room were made of rubies. Out of this room there was a passage into the emperor's bedchamber, the walls whereof were of jet, and the floor of black marble. The roof was of mother of pearl, where the moon and blazing stars were represented by white diamonds, and his bed was made of diamonds and carbuncles. I think it's time for you to start.
I was gonna say.
I think I've done enough.
Have we got anything to say about that big section?
Oh, Chris is here. Our friend, photographer Chris, is here. 1 minute.
Should I just carry on?
Yeah.
Carry on.
Oh no, don't. You talk about what we've said so far. Oh, 1 minute.
I guess I'll just wait then. So as far as I can tell, this woman was on a journey on a boat with a bunch of men, and they went to the North Pole. This is in our world. And then when they got to the North Pole, it was so cold that all the men died, but she remained alive because she was so beautiful and the gods liked that. And then she passed from the North Pole of our world to the North Pole of another world. And now she's there.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. We're joined by Chris, who is a wonderful photographer who you can find on Instagram at photo13. What are the numbers?
13113.
Photo13113. Lovely. Oh.
Wow, this is atmospheric.
We've got our lyre music and our Margaret Cavendish, and we've read about how many pages? Not many.
Not many compared to how many there are.
Right, where are we?
Do you want me to carry on?
Yeah, you carry on.
So yeah, I was just trying to recap where we got to. So a woman was on a voyage with a bunch of men in our world to the North Pole. All the men died of the cold.
Is that what they died of?
Yeah.
I thought it was the passage between the worlds that they died of.
They died of the cold, and the gods took pity on the woman because she was beautiful.
She was so warm.
So she passed from the North Pole of our world to the North Pole of the next world, where she met bear men, fox men, and bird men. And then they took her through their island nations, and they found the sea, crossed the sea in their very elaborate boats, some of which were gold, some of which were leather. The
leather boats that are much better than our wooden boats because they're like honeycomb.
Yes, exactly. And they got to the blazing world, and she's been taken straight to the emperor there by the green men.
Who are the green men?
And that was, and then there was a big description.
But
of the
are
palace.
the green men, are they an animal, or are they men that just happen to be green? Because everyone else seems to be like a bear man or a fox man or a geese man.
I think they just
were they just
green.
men?
They were just men of a green complexion.
Okay, makes sense. They're like plant sims on Sims 2.
Yeah, exactly. And then we had a very detailed description of the palace. It sounds very grand.
So we're at the emperor's apartment right now.
Yeah.
Who she is a gift for the emperor.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite exciting because I don't think there are any women in this world.
Oh, she is a gift for the emperor.
Yeah, she is the gift.
I thought you said she has a gift. She is
yeah, she's brought like a bowl of Merlot.
Okay. Here we go.
Okay, ready.
Oh, hang on. I think I'm on the wrong page.
It's no sooner was the lady.
Okay. No sooner was the lady brought before the emperor, but he conceived her to be some goddess and offered her to worship her, which he refused, telling him, for by that time she had pretty well learnt their language.
How long has it been?
Not long. That although she came out of another world, yet she was but a mortal. At which the emperor, rejoicing, made her his wife, and gave her an absolute power to rule and govern all that the world as she pleased. But
wait. So it's been set up that this world only works because there's one sole leader, and he's just made her, given her absolute power.
Well, maybe that's where the novel's going to go. What happens?
Like, it was working so well for them.
What happens when the leadership is
okay, makes sense.
But her subjects, who could hardly be persuaded to believe her mortal, tendered her all the veneration and worship due to a deity.
Are there gods in this world?
Well, now there is. Her accoutrement, after she was made empress, was as follows. On her head she wore a cap of pearl, and a half moon of diamonds just before it. On the top of her crown came spreading over a broad carbuncle.
What is a carbuncle? We've had this word so many times.
I have no idea. A broad carbuncle cut in the form of the sun. Her coat was of pearl, mixed with blue diamonds, and fringed with red ones. Her buskins and sandals were of green diamonds. In her left hand she held a buckler to signify the defence of her dominions. Which buckler?
Sorry. A carbuncle is a red, swollen, and painful cluster of boils. I don't think that's what she means. I feel like there must be a different meaning.
Yeah, carbuncle, some sort of growth.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Prince Charles famously described a new building in London as a carbuncle.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, one was it?
And he got into trouble from architects.
Ooh. I wonder what
I
Prince
love
Charles
that.
would have said about the palace that was just described. He'd probably quite like it.
Yeah, to be fair, it
It's
sounds
quite
pretty
ornate.
nice.
No, he would like it if it was made out of wattle and daub. And
Yeah.
We love
Right,
it.
to signify the
Where
times
are
in
we?
which buckler was made of that sort of diamond as has several different colours,
Ah,
and
yes.
being cut and made in the form of an arch, showed like a rainbow. In her right hand she carried a spear made of a white diamond, cut like the tail of a blazing star, which signified that she was ready to assault those that proved her enemies.
But they don't have any enemies in this world.
Well,
The whole
she's
point is there
prepared.
aren't
She's
any
prepared.
enemies.
You're always got to be prepared, haven't you? None was allowed to use or wear gold, but those of imperial race, which were the only nobles of the state. Nor durst anyone wear jewels but the emperor, the empress, and their eldest son, notwithstanding that they had an infinite quantity both of gold and precious stones in that world. For they had larger extents of gold than our Arabian sands. Their precious stones were rocks, and their diamonds of several colours. They used no coining, but all their traffic was by exchange of several commodities. Their priests and governors were princes of the imperial blood, and made eunuchs for that purpose. Oh, they were made eunuchs for that purpose. Yeah.
Right.
And as for the ordinary sort of men in that part of the world where the emperor resided, they were of several complexions, not white, black, tawny, olive, or ash-coloured, but some appeared of an azure, some of a deep purple, some of a grass green, some of a scarlet, some of an orange colour, etc.
I like there's just so many, and she's like, etc. What else could there possibly be?
Which colours, and see the lyrics to Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat for more colours. Which colours and complexions, whether they were made by the bare reflection of light, without the assistance of small particles, or by the help of well-ranged or ordered atoms, or by a continual agitation of little globules, or by some pressing and reacting motion, I am not able to determine.
You wrote this.
There's a bunch of options.
It.
I'm not sure which one it is. The rest of the inhabitants of that world were men of several different sorts, shapes, figures, dispositions, and humours, as I have already made mention before.
Just in case it wasn't clear.
Some were bear men, some were worm men, some were fish men, and some were mere men.
What's a merman?
Like a
mermaid,
I think. Yeah.
Right.
I think they're a bit grosser normally when they're depicted.
Mm.
Yeah, like mermaids are all like beautiful, and mere men are a bit like whales with carbuncles. Otherwise called sirens.
Okay.
Some the list continues. Okay, some bird men, some fly men, some ant men. Shout out to
Cool,
Marvel.
right?
Some geese men, some spider men. Shout out to Marvel. Some lice men, some fox men, some ape men, some jackdaw men, some magpie men, some parrot men, some satyrs, some giants, and many more, which I cannot all remember. You're making this up, Margaret.
Wait, so is this? She's Margaret's telling this as, is she telling this as Margaret or as the woman? Wait, she's not
the woman.
She's not the woman. But it's like, why can't she remember who told her this story? Was it the woman? Or
it's a good question. Maybe we'll find out. I think she's maybe
like, who is she? Can't say that. Right, cool.
Each followed such and of these several sorts of men, each followed such a profession as was most proper for the nature of their species, which the empress encouraged them in, especially those that had applied themselves to the study of several arts and sciences, for they were as ingenious and witty in the invention of profitable and useful art as we are in our world, nay more. And to that end, she erected schools and founded several societies.
How long has she been here?
It's unclear, isn't it? The bear men,
very unclear.
The bear men were to be her experimental philosophers. The bird men, her astronomers. The fly, worm, and fish men, her natural philosophers. The ape men, her chemists. The satyrs, her Galenic physicians. The fox men, her politicians. The spider and lice men, her mathematicians. The jackdaw, magpie, and parrot men, her orators and logicians. The giant, her architects, etc. But before all things, she, having got a sovereign power from the emperor over all the world, desired to be informed both of the manner of their religion and government.
Right.
And to that
it's
end,
useful to know.
And to that end, she called the priests and statesmen to give her an account of either. Of the statesmen, she inquired first why they had so few laws, to which they answered that many laws made many divisions, which most commonly did breed factions, and as the last breakout of into open wars. So last time they had laws, it led to a war, I think.
So now they have no laws and no wars.
Yeah.
Right.
Hot tip.
Right.
Next,
I
she
see.
asked why they preferred the monarchical form of government above any other. They answered that as it was natural for one body to have but one head, so it was also natural for a political body to have but one governor, and that a commonwealth which had many governors was like a monster with many heads. Besides, said they, a monarchy is a divine form of government, and agrees most with our religion. For as there is but one God whom we all unanimously worship and adore with one faith, so we are resolved to have but one emperor to whom we all submit with one obedience.
But they've just made her the empress.
Yeah, it doesn't add up yet.
It doesn't add up.
Maybe that's going to be the central conflict. You know?
Maybe. I don't know that there will be a central conflict.
Then the empress, seeing that the several sorts of her subjects had each their churches apart, asked the priests whether they were of several religions. They answered Her Majesty that there was no more but one religion in all that world, nor no diversity of opinions in that same religion. For though they were of several sorts of men, yet had they all but one opinion concerning the worship and adoration of God.
Right.
The empress had asked them whether they were Jews, Turks, or Christians. We do not know, said they, what religions those are. Well, because they're from a different world.
They are from a different world, yeah.
But we do all unanimously acknowledge, worship, and adore the only omnipotent and eternal God with all reverence, submission, and duty.
Right, okay.
Sounds pretty oppressive. Again, the empress inquired whether they had several forms of worship. They answered no, for our devotion and worship consists only in prayers, which we frame according to our several necessities in petitions, humiliations, thanksgivings, etc.
There's so many etceteras.
Truly, replied the empress, I thought you had been either Jews or Turks, because I never perceived any women in your congregations.
Yeah, here we go.
This is 400 years old, everyone.
Wow.
But what is the reason you bar them from your religious assemblies? It is not fit, said they, that men and women should be promiscuously together in times of religious worship, for their company hinders devotion, and makes many, instead of praying to God, direct their devotion to their mistresses. Wow. But asked the empress, have they no congregation of their own to perform the duties of divine worship as well as men? No, they answered. That's a good one. But they stay at home and say their prayers by themselves in the closets.
In their closet?
No, the women just stay at home and pray in their closets. Okay.
Oh, yeah, but closet used to mean something different.
Oh, what it used to mean?
So it was a room.
Not just a
cupboard.
Not just a cupboard. There you go.
Okay, so they answer they, but they stay at home and say their prayers by themselves in their small roomed closets. Then the empress desired to know the reasons why the priests and governors of their world were made eunuchs. They answered, to keep them from marriage. For women and children most commonly make disturbance both in church and state. But, said she, women and children have no employment in the church or state. 'Tis true, answered they, but although they are not admitted to public employments, yet they are so prevalent with their husbands and parents that many times by their importunate persuasions they cause as much, nay more mischief secretly than if they had the management of public affairs.
Wow, Cavendish said give women jobs.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they'll get into mischief.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
Crazy. The empress, having received an information of what concerned both church and state, passed some time in viewing the imperial palace, where she admired much of the skill and ingenuity of the architects, and inquired of them, first, why they built their houses no higher than 2 stories from the ground.
That is the first question I would ask.
They answered Her Majesty that the lower their buildings were, the less they were subject either to the heat of the sun, to wind, tempest, decay, etc.
What else?
So they were like hurricane-proof buildings.
Yeah.
Then she desired to know the reason why they made them so thick. They answered that the thicker the walls were, the warmer were they in winter and the cooler in summer. for their thickness kept out both cold and heat. Well, that's just a real reason, isn't it? Yeah,
That's
fair.
just quite normal. Yeah.
Lastly, she asked why they arched their roofs and made so many pillars. They replied that arches and pillars did not only grace a building very much and caused it to appear magnificent, but made it also firm and lasting. The Empress was well satisfied with their answers. That's funny. The Empress was well satisfied with their answers.
Well satisfied.
And after some time, when she thought that her new-founded societies of the virtuosos had made a good progress in their several employments, which she had put upon them, she caused a convocation first of the birdmen and commanded them to give her a true relation of the two celestial bodies, vis-a-vis the sun and moon. Which they did with all the obedience and faithfulness befitting their duty.
Makes sense.
The sun, as much as they could observe, they related to be a firm or solid stone of a vast bigness, of colour yellowish, and of an extraordinary splendour. So 1666, how much do they actually know about the sun? That's post Galileo, right?
Yeah.
But like maybe
1856.
Is that?
A very post Galileo.
No, 1666.
Oh, 1666.
Yeah. Where
But
are
so
we?
this is
Oh,
like-
of course. Yes, you told me, because it's the year of the Great Fire of London.
Yeah. So this is pre-Enlightenment, but post ideas about solar system.
Oh, what a world, what a world.
Well. But the moon, they said, was of a whitish colour, and although she looked dim in the presence of the sun, yet had she her own light, and was a shining body of herself, as might be perceived by her vigorous appearance in moonshiny night.
Vigorous appearance.
In moonshiny nights.
Makes sense.
The difference only betwixt her own and the sun's light was that the sun did strike his beams in a direct line. But the moon never respected the centre of their world in a right line, but her centre was always eccentrical. Yeah. So that's legit.
That is
the orbit of the moon changes, but our orbit of the sun doesn't.
She was onto something here.
I think that's the failed physics.
Yeah, scientists let us know.
The spots both in the sun and moon, as far as they were able to perceive, they affirmed to be nothing else but flaws and stains of their stony bodies. Concerning the heat of the sun, they were not of one opinion. Some would have the sun hot in itself, alleging an old tradition, that it should at some time break asunder and burn the heavens, and consume this world into hot embers, which said they could not be done if the sun were not fiery of itself. I didn't understand what I just said. Others again said this opinion could not stand with reason. For fire being a destroyer of all things, the sunstone after this matter would burn up all the near adjoining bodies. Besides, said they, fire cannot subsist without fuel, and the sunstone, having nothing to feed on, would in a short time consume itself. Whereof they thought it more probable than the sun was not actually hot, but only by the reflection of its light.
The sun's not hot.
So that its heat was an effect of its light, both being immaterial. But
I don't think that's true.
No. But this opinion again was laughed at by others, like us, and rejected as ridiculous. Who thought it was impossible that one immaterial should produce another, and believed that both the light and heat of the sun proceeded from a swift circular motion of the ethereal globules, which by their striking upon the optic nerve caused light, and their motion produced heat. But neither would this opinion hold, for, said some, then it would follow that the sight of animals is the cause of light, and that were there no eyes, there would be no light, which was against all sense and reason. Thus they argued concerning the heat and light
that's
of
our
the
camera.
Sun.
You're on YouTube.
Oh, sorry, were you moving the tripod?
Can you still see it?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Welcome to YouTube.
I don't recognise these things.
Yeah, it's a bit of a makeshift setup. It's what is that? A GoPro masking tape to a tripod?
but
I can possibly say.
Even if it was professional, I can't guarantee I would recognise it. I do recognise the microphone.
Yeah. Where did I get to?
Sorry.
Eyes.
Oh yeah.
There are eyes every day life.
Thus they argued concerning the heat and light of the sun, but which is remarkable, none did say that the sun was a globus fluid body, and had a swift circular motion. But all agreed it was fixed and firm like a centre, and therefore they generally called it the sunstone.
So that was just a very long explanation as to why they call the sun
I'm not
the
sure.
sunstone.
I don't know that it's finished. I think there's one more
There's
paragraph
more.
on
Oh
it.
god. Okay.
Then the Empress asked them the reason why the sun and moon did often appear in the different postures or shapes, as sometimes magnified, sometimes diminished, sometimes elevated, otherwhiles depressed, now thrown to the right and then to the left.
That was quite nice.
To which some of the birdmen answered that it proceeded from the various degrees of heat and cold which are found in the air, from whence did follow a differing density and rarity, and likewise from the vapours that are interposed, whereof those that ascended are higher and less dense than the ambient air, but those which descend are heavier and more dense.
Right.
But others did with more probability affirm that it was nothing else but the various patterns of the air. For like as painters do not copy out one and the same original just alike at all times, so, said they, do several parts of the air make different patterns of the luminous bodies of the sun and moon, which patterns, as several copies, the sensitive motions do figure out in the substance of our eyes.
Right.
This answer the Empress liked much better than the former, and inquired further what opinion they had of those creatures that are called the motes of the sun.
What are those?
M-O-T-E-S.
The motes of the sun. Right.
To which they answered that they were nothing else but streams of very small, rare, and transparent particles, through which the sun was represented as through a glass. For if they were not transparent, said they would eclipse the light of the sun. And if not rare and of an airy substance, they would hinder flies from flying in the air, at least for their flying motion. Nevertheless, although they were thinner than the thinnest vapour, yet were they not so thin as the body of air, or else they would not be perceptible by animal sight. Then the Empress asked whether they were living creatures. They answered yes, because they did increase and decrease, and were nourished by the presence and starved by the absence of sun.
Right.
Final little paragraph. Having thus finished their discourse on the sun and moon, thank the Lord,
Thank
the
goodness.
Empress desired to know what stars there were besides. But they answered that they could perceive in that world none other but blazing stars, and from thence it had the name that it was called the blazing world. And these blazing stars, said they, were such solid, firm, and shining bodies as the sun and moon, not of a globular, but of several sorts of figures. Some had tails, and some other kinds of shapes.
So what do we learn?
that Margaret Cavendish knew nothing about the sun and moon. It's interesting that the sun is a man and the moon is a woman, though. Pronouns-wise.
The moon is a woman.
Yeah.
Isn't a mote a spot that you get in your eye? Something biblical about a mote in your eye. So perhaps a mote with regard to the sun is a sunspot.
Oh, yeah. Quite.
Yeah, but I'm not the only one that's not making sense.
Absolutely not.
It's true.
Where was mote in the order of things?
No, I'm not. It was in the yeah.
Oh yeah, here we go. What opinion had they of those creatures that are called the motes of the sun? Oh yes, it's sunspot. That whole little aspect was about sunspots. Are they living creatures?
Turns out, yes, they are.
And they say yes. So they're saying they are living creatures because they increase and decrease, and were nourished by the presence and starved by the absence of the sun.
Makes sense.
So there's little living creatures on the sun.
Because the sun's not hot. Right. Do you want me to carry on? Right. After this, the Empress asked them what kind of substance or creature the air was. The birdmen answered that they could have no other perception of the air but by their own respiration, for, said thee, some bodies are only subject to touch, others only to sight, and others only to smell. But some are subject to none of our exterior senses, for nature is so full of variety that our weak senses cannot perceive all the various sorts of her creatures. Neither is there any one object perceptible by all of our senses, no more than several objects are by one sense. I believe you, replied the Empress, but if you can give no account of the air, said she, you will hardly be able to inform me how the wind is made. For they say that wind is nothing but motion of the air. The Birdmen answered that they observed wind to be more dense than air, and therefore subject to the sense of touch. But what properly wind was, and the matter how it was made, they could not exactly tell. Some said it was caused by the clouds falling on each other, and others that it was produced of a hot and dry exhalation, which ascending was driven down again by the coldness of the air that is in the middle region, and by reason of its lightness could not go directly to the bottom, but was carried by the air up and down. Some would have it a flowing water of the air, and others again a flowing air moved by the blaze of the stars. But the Empress, seeing that they could not agree concerning the cause of the wind, asked whether they could tell how snow was made. To which they answered that according to their observation, snow was made by a commixture of water and some certain extract of the element of fire that is under the moon, a small portion of which extract is being mixed with water and beaten by air or wind, made a white froth called snow, which being after some while dissolved by the heat of the same spirit, turned to being water again. This observation amazed the Empress very much, for she had hitherto believed that snow was made by cold motions, and not by such an agitation or beating of a fiery extract upon water, nor could she be persuaded to believe it until the fish or mere men had delivered their observation upon the making of ice, which they said was not produced, as some had hitherto conceived, by the motion of the air, raking the superficies of the earth, but by some strong saline vapour arising out of the seas, which condensed water into ice. And the more quantity there was of that vapour, the greater were the mountains or precipices of ice. But the reason that it did not so much freeze in the torrid zone or under the ecliptic as near or under the poles was that this vapour in the places being drawn by the sunbeams into the middle region of the air was only condensed into air and fell down in showers of rain, when as under the poles the heat of the sun being not so vehement, is that word again?
Vehement.
Oh, of course.
No, there's lots of words that my generation would know, and you I bet there's a lot more that you know that I don't.
I doubt that.
The same vapour had no force or power to rise so high, and therefore caused so much ice by ascending and acting only upon the surface of water. This relation confirmed partly the observation of the Birdmen concerning the cause of snow, but since they had made mention that the same extract by which its commixture with water made snow proceeded from the element of fire that is under the moon, the Empress asked them of what nature the elementary fire was, whether it was like the ordinary fire here upon earth, or such as fire as is within the bowels of the earth, and as the famous mountains Vesuvius and Etna do burn withal, or whether it was such a source of fire that is found in flints, etc. They answered that the elementary fire which is underneath the sun was not so solid as those mentioned fires, because it had no solid fuel to feed on, but yet it was much like the flame of ordinary fire, only somewhat more thin and fluid. For flame, said they, is nothing else but the airy part of a fired body. Lastly, the Empress asked the Birdmen of the nature of thunder and lightning, and whether it was caused by rows of ice. Yeah?
Are the Birdmen the weathermen?
Maybe. Yeah?
What did she say the Birdmen were?
How far back was that? The Birdmen.
Oh, I'll find it.
Birdmen or something. Yes, and whether it was not caused by rows of ice falling on each other, to which they answered that it was not made that way, but by an encounter of cold and heat, so that an exhalation being kindled in the clouds did dash forth lightning, that there were so many rentings of clouds as there were sounds and cracking noises.
Astronomers.
Yeah. Opinion was contradicted by others, who affirmed that thunder was a sudden and monstrous bias, stirred up in the air and did not always require a cloud. But the Empress, not knowing what they meant by bias, for even they themselves were not able to explain the sense of this word, like the former better, and to avoid hereafter tedious disputes, and have the truth of the phenomenas.
Phenomenas, I think.
Oh, of course.
I think it's just spelled,
spelled wrong. Phenomena of celestial bodies, more exactly known, commanded the bear men, which were her experimental philosophers, to observe them through such instruments as are called telescopes, which they did not according to her Majesty's command, but these telescopes caused more differences and divisions among them than they had ever had before. For some said they perceived that the sun stood still and the earth did not move about it. Others were of the opinion that they both did move, and others said again that the earth stood still and the sun did move. Some counted more stars than others. Some discovered new stars never seen before. Some fell into a great dispute with others concerning the bigness of the stars. Some said the moon was another world like their terrestrial globe, and the spots therein were hills and valleys. But others would have the spots to be terrestrial parts, and the smooth and glossy parts the sea. At last, the Empress commanded them to go with their telescopes to the very end of the pole that was joined to the world she came from, and try whether they could perceive any stars in it, which they did. And being returned to her Majesty, reported that they had seen 3 blazing stars appear there, one after another in a short time, whereof 2 were bright, 1 dim, but they could not agree neither in this observation, for some said it was but 1 star, which appeared at 3 several times in several places, and others would have them... Where am I?
Others would have them to be 3 several stars.
For they thought it was impossible that those 3 several appearances should have been but 1 star, because every star did rise at a certain time, and appeared in a certain place, and disappear in the same place. Next, it is altogether improbable, said they, that 1 star should fly from place to place, especially at such a vast distance, without a visible motion, in so short a time, and appear in such different places, whereof 2 were quite opposite, and the 3rd sideways. Lastly, if it had been but 1 star, said they, it would always have kept the same splendour, which it did not, for, as above mentioned, 2 were bright and 1 was dim. After they had thus agreed, the Empress began to grow angry at their telescopes, that they could give no better intelligence, for, said she, now I do plainly perceive that your glasses are false informers, and instead of discovering the truth, delude your senses, wherefore I command you to break them, and let the birdmen trust only their natural eyes.
Oh my God, is she anti-science?
Yeah, she's like, destroy the telescopes and examine celestial objects by the motions of their own sense and reason.
There you go, throw out your telescopes and just look at the sky.
Do birds have particularly good eyes? Unclear.
No, these are bear, aren't they?
The birdmen, it says the birdmen should trust only their natural eyes. The bear men replied that it was not the fault of their glasses which caused such differences in their opinions, but the sensitive motions in their optic organs did not move alike, nor were their rational judgments always regular. So it's like, we all have different eyes.
Oh, Stella Shaw says, hello, this is very fun.
Hi, Stella. If you're still here, welcome to the stream. Let us know what you think of Margaret C. Where am I?
Yes, of course. I can get one for you.
No.
You sure?
Yeah, there should be one out there. Shout out to Chris, our photographer. Where am I? To which the Empress answered that if their glasses were true informers, they would rectify their irregular sense and reason. But, said she, nature has made your senses and reason more regular than art has your glasses, for they are the deluders and will never lead you to the knowledge of truth. Wherefore I command you again to break them, for you may observe the progressive motions of celestial bodies with your natural eyes better than through artificial glasses. The bear men, being exceedingly troubled at Her Majesty's displeasure concerning their telescopes, kneeled down and in the humblest manner petitioned that they might not be broken. For, said they, we take more delight in artificial delusions than in natural truths. Besides, we shall want employments for our senses and subjects for arguments. For were there nothing but truth and no falsehood, there would be no occasion for to dispute. And by this means we should want the aim and pleasure of our endeavours in confuting and contradiction each other. Neither would one man be thought wiser than another, and all would either be alike in knowing and wise, or all would be fools. Wherefore we most humbly beseech your imperial majesty to spare our glasses, which are our only delight, and as dear to us as our lives. The empress at last consented to their request, but upon condition that their disputes and quarrels should remain within their schools, and cause no factions or disturbances in state or government. The bear men, full of joy, returned to their most humble thanks to the empress, and to make her amends for the displeasure which their telescopes had occasioned, told her majesty that they had several other artificial optic glasses, which they were sure would give her majesty a great deal more satisfaction. Amongst the rest, they brought forth several microscopes, by the means of which they could enlarge the shapes of little bodies, make a louse appear as big as an elephant, and a mite as big as a whale. First of all, they showed the empress a grey dronefly, wherein they observed the greatest part of her face, nay, of her head, consisted of 2 large bunches, all covered over with a multitude of small pearls or hemispheres in a trigonal order. Which pearls are of 2 degrees, smaller and bigger. The smaller degree was lowermost and looked towards the ground. The other was upward and looked sideward, forward and backward. They were all so smooth and polished that they were able to represent the image of any object. The number of them was all in all 14,000. After the view of this strange and miraculous creature and their several observations upon it, the empress asked them what they judged those little hemispheres might be. They answered that each of them was a perfect eye, by reason they perceived that each was covered with a transparent cornea containing a liquor within them, which resembled the watery or glassy humour of the eye. To which the empress replied that they might be glassy pearls, and yet eyes not eyes, that perhaps their microscope did not truly inform them. But they smilingly answered their majesty that she did not know the virtue of those microscopes, for they did never delude but rectify and inform their senses. Nay, the world, said they, will be but blind without them, as it has been in former ages before those microscopes were invented. After this, they took a charcoal, and viewing it in one of their best microscopes, discovered in it an infinite multitude of pores, some bigger, some less, some close and thick, and that they left but very little space betwixt them to be filled with a solid body. And to give her imperial majesty a better assurance thereof, they counted in a line of them an inch long, no less than 2,700 pores, from which observation they drew this following conclusion, to wit, that this multitude of pores was the cause of the blackness of the coal, said they, a body that has so many pores, from each of which no light is reflected, must necessarily look black, since black is nothing else but a privation of light, or a want of reflection. But the empress replied that if all colours were made by reflection of light, and that black was as much a colour as any other colour, then certainly they contradicted themselves in saying that black was made of want of reflection. However, not to interrupt your microscopical inspection, said she, let us see how vegetables appear through your glasses.
She's just a prankster.
She's so funny. Whereupon they took a nettle, and by the virtue of the microscope discovered that underneath the point of the nettle there were several little bags or bladders containing a poisonous liqueur. Liquor. I thought that'd be funny. And when the points had made their way into the interior parts of the skin, they, like syringe pipes, served to convey the same liquor into them. To which observation the empress replied that if there was such poison in nettles, then certainly in eating of them they would hurt us inwardly, as much as they do outwardly. But they answered that it belonged to physicians more than to experimental philosophers to give reasons hereof. For they only made microscopical inspections and related the figures of the natural parts of creatures according to the presentation of their glasses. Lastly, they showed the empress a flea and a louse, to which creatures through the microscope appeared so terrible to her sight that they had put her into a swoon. The description of all their parts would be very tedious to relate, and therefore I'll forbear it at this present. So she's saying it would be boring to say this, but I'll say everything else I've said already.
Yeah.
The Empress, after the view of those strangely shaped creatures, pitied much so that are molested within them, especially poor beggars, which, although they have nothing to live on themselves, are yet necessitated to maintain and feed of their own flesh and blood, a company of such terrible creatures called lice, who instead of give thanks, do reward them with pains and torment them for giving them nourishment and food. But after the Empress had seen the shapes of these monstrous creatures, she desired to know whether their microscopes could hinder their biting,
Let's go out the telescope.
or at least show some means of how to avoid them. To which they answered that such arts were mechanical and below the noble study of microscopical observations. Then the Empress asked them whether they had not such sorts of glasses that could enlarge and magnify the shapes of great bodies, as well as they had done of the little ones. Whereupon they took one of their best and largest microscopes and endeavoured to view a whale through it. But alas! The shape of the whale was so big that its circumference went beyond the magnifying quality of the glass.
Not surprising.
Yeah. Whether the error proceeded from the glass, from a wrong position of the whale against the reflection of light, I cannot certainly tell. The Empress, seeing the insufficiency of those magnifying glasses, that they were not able to enlarge all sorts of objects, asked the bear men whether they could not make glasses of a contrary nature to those that they had showed her, to wit, such as instead of enlarging or magnifying the shape or figure of an object, could contract it beneath its natural proportion, which, in obedience to Her Majesty's commands, they did, and viewing it through one of the very best of them, a huge and mighty whale appeared no bigger than a sprat, nay,
Wow.
through some no bigger than a vine-greel, and through their ordinary ones, an elephant seemed no bigger than a flea, a camel no bigger than a louse, an ostrich no bigger than a mite. To relate all their optic observations through the several sorts of their glasses would be tedious work, and tire even the most patient reader.
We're quite patient.
We are so patient. Wherefore, I'll pass them by. Only this was very remarkable and worthy to be taken notice of, that notwithstanding their great skill, industry, and ingenuity in experimental philosophy, that they could yet by no means contrive such glasses, by the help of which they could spy out a vacuum, with all its dimensions, nor immaterial substances, non-beings and mixed beings, or such as are between something and nothing, which they are very much troubled at, hoping that yet in time, by long study and practice, they might perhaps attain to it. I'm stopping.
I
It's
sensed
your
that
turn.
you wanted to stop.
I'm stopping.
Got to the end and you were like, which they were very much troubled at.
Wait,
what
so
did
let's
we
just
learn?
recap.
Yeah.
She hates telescopes, she likes microscopes,
Apparently.
but she wants better microscopes, which she got.
Yeah.
I think that's all we needed to know.
And the microscopes made whales look like mites, which is impressive.
It is very impressive.
Impressive.
It's impressive for
impressive
a bear.
fictional science.
They do if you look the wrong way through them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Here we go.
Here we go.
The bird and the bear men being dismissed, the Empress called both the sirens, or fishmen, and the worm men to deliver their observations which they had made, both within the seas and the earth. First she inquired of the fishmen whence the saltiness of the sea did proceed. To which they answered that there was a volatile salt in those parts of the earth, which as a bosom contained the waters of the sea, which salt being imbibed in the sea became fixed. And this imbibing motion was that they called the ebbing and flowing of the sea. For, said they, the rising and swelling of the water is caused by those parts of the volatile salt as are not so easily imbibed, which striving to ascend above the water, bear it up with such a motion as man or some other animal creature in a violent exercise uses to take breath. This they affirm to be the true cause of both the saltness and the ebbing and flowing motion of the sea, and not the jogging of the earth or the secret influence of the moon, as some others had made the world believe. But it actually is the secret influence of the moon in the real world. Anyway.
In the real
Not in the
world.
blazing world, though.
Yeah, the blazing world is not the real
I
world.
like
I've come to
the
realize.
secret influence of the moon. That's really funny. After this, the Empress inquired whether they had observed that all animal creatures within the seas and other waters had blood. They answered that some had blood, more or less, but some had none. In crayfishes and lobsters, said they, we perceive but little blood.
Is that true? Yeah, come on.
I don't know.
I don't know.
But in crabs, oysters, cockles, etc., none at all.
Wow.
Do you know crabs and oysters and cockles have blood?
No, that's No.
Well, not
They
in this
must
one.
have. They must have something.
They've
They've got to have
haven't
something,
they?
right?
It's-
I'm gonna Google that.
Then the Empress asked them
Do
in
crabs
what
have
part of
blood?
their bodies that little blood did reside. They answered, in a small vein, which in lobsters went through the middle of their tails, but in crayfishes was found in their backs.
Crabs do have blood, and apparently it is the key to making a COVID-19 vaccine.
According to what news source?
National Geographic.
National Geographic. Wow, you heard it here.
So Margaret
Well, you
Cavendish,
didn't
you
hear it
are
here
wrong.
You heard it in National Geographic first.
Yeah, we're not the. Yeah.
So lobsters have a vein in their tails and crayfishes have it in their backs. As for the other sorts of fishes, some said they had only blood about their gills, and others in some other places of their bodies. But they had not as yet observed any whose veins did spread all over their bodies. The Empress, wondering that there could be living animals without blood, to be better satisfied, desired the worm men to inform her whether they had observed blood in all sorts of worms. They answered that as much as they could perceive. What do you think the worm men look like?
Like worms.
But like,
But do they have legs?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, maybe they do. I feel like they do have. I feel like it's worm head and then just like legs.
And do you think the
With
body
shoes.
is as thick as a normal torso would be?
Yes.
Or do you think it's just like a wormy torso comes out of the legs, like right from the middle, and it's this thin little line?
I imagine. No, I think it's real thick.
Okay, real thick.
Yeah, I think it's real thick.
Like a thumb. A
Yeah.
legs and then a thumb.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I feel that.
That's great.
Yeah, it's good.
They answered that this is about worm men observing blood in worms. They answered that as much as they could
In themselves or worms?
No, worms.
So in this world, both wormmen and worms exist.
I think so, yeah.
So they're like, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
They answered that as much as they could perceive, some had blood and some not. A moth, they said, had no blood at all, and a louse had but like a lobster, a little vein along her back. Also nits, snails, and maggots, as well as those that are generated out of cheese and fruits, as those that are produced out of flesh, had no blood.
Right.
But, replied the Empress, if those mentioned creatures have no blood, how is it possible that they can live? It's a good question.
That is a very
For it is
good
commonly
question.
said that the life of an animal consists in the blood, which is the seat of the animal spirits. They answered that blood was not a necessary blood was not a necessary propriety to the life of an animal, and that which was commonly called animal spirit was nothing else but corporeal motions proper to the nature and figure of an animal. What do you mean? That makes no sense. Why are you agreeing with that?
Yeah, it checks out.
Then she asked both the fish and worm men whether all those creatures that have blood had a circulation of blood in their veins and arteries. But they answered that it was impossible to give her majesty an exact account thereof, by reason the circulation of blood was an interior motion, which their senses, neither of themselves nor by the help of any optic instrument, could perceive. But as soon as they had directed an animal creature to find out the truth thereof, the interior corporeal motions proper to that particular figure or creature were altered. Don't know what that sentence meant, but I think they're against animal testing.
Oh, that's good.
So they're just saying that they couldn't perceive any of the internal workings from the outside, and then so they didn't know. They're not going to cut.
Wait,
them
how
open.
did they know that any of these things did or did not have blood then? If they haven't been cutting them open,
maybe not. Then.
Maybe they stopped there.
Although I'm pretty sure Margaret Cavendish was a very early animal rights activist, like one of the earliest.
Everything I learned about this
Sure,
woman.
I read that. Might have made it up.
Might have made it up. We like to believe it though.
Yeah.
Where are we?
Then said the Empress, if all animal creatures have not blood, it is certain they have neither all muscles, tendons, nerves, etc. But, said she, have you ever observed animal creatures that are neither flesh nor fish, but of an intermediate degree between both?
Ooh.
Truly, answered both the fish and worm men, we have observed several animal creatures that live both in water and on the earth indifferently. And if any, certainly those may be said to be of such a mixed nature, that is partly flesh and partly fish. But how is it possible, replied the Empress, that they should live both in water and on earth, since those animals that live by the respiration of air cannot live within water, and those that live within water cannot live by the respiration of air, as experience doth sufficiently witness. That's a great phrase. As experience doth sufficiently witness. They answered Her Majesty that as there were different sorts of creatures, so they had also different ways of respiration. For respiration, said they, was nothing else but a composition and division of parts, and the motions of nature being infinitely various, it was impossible that all creatures should have the like motions. Wherefore it was not necessary that all animal creatures should be bound to live either by the air or by water only, but according as nature had ordered it convenient to their species. The Empress seemed very well satisfied with their answer, and desired to be further informed whether all animal creatures did continue their species by a successive propagation of particulars, and whether in every species the offspring did always resemble their generator or producer, both in their interior and exterior figures. They answered Her Majesty that some species or sorts of creatures were kept up by a successive propagation of an offspring that was like the producer, but some were not. Of the first rank, said they, are all those animals that are of different sexes, besides several others, but of the second rank are for the most part those we call insects, whose production proceeds from such causes as have no conformity or likeness with their produced effects. As, for example, maggots spread out of cheese, and several other generated out of the earth, water, and the like. Okay. I don't know why they think maggots come from cheese. Well, I know why they think that, but I don't know why scientifically they do that. But, said the Empress, there is some likeness between maggots and cheese. They're obsessed with it. For cheese has no blood, and so neither have maggots.
Of course, it all makes sense.
Besides, they have almost the same taste which cheese has.
And why are they eating maggots?
This proves nothing, answered
almost. It's true. It does prove nothing.
This proves nothing, answered they. For maggots have a visible local progressive motion, which cheese hath not. So maggots move and cheese doesn't. The Empress replied that when all the cheese was turned into maggots, it might be said to have local progressive motion. Yeah, my shirt has local progressive motion if I wear it. They answered that when the cheese by its own figurative motions was changed into maggots, it was no more cheese. The Empress confessed that she observed nature was infinitely various in her works, and that though the species of creatures did continue, yet their particulars were subject to infinite changes. But since you have informed me, said she, of the various sorts and productions of animal creatures, I desire you to tell me what you have observed of their sensitive perceptions. Truly, answered they, your Majesty puts a very hard question to us, and we shall hardly be able to give a satisfactory answer to it. For there are many different sorts of creatures, which as they have all different perceptions, so they have also different organs, which our senses are not able to discover. Only in an oyster shell we have with admiration observed that the common sensorium of the oyster lies just at the closing of the shells, where the pressure and reaction may be perceived by the opening and shutting of the shells every tide. Cool. We're learning a lot about oysters.
Yeah, too much, I'd say.
Or are we? Are we learning fake news about oysters?
We're anti-learning.
After all this, the Empress desired the worm men to give her a true relation how frost was made upon the earth, to which they answered that it was made much after the manner and description of the fish and bird men concerning the congelation of water into ice and snow, by a commixture of saline and acid particles, which relation added a great light to the ape men, who were the chemists, concerning their chemical principles, salt, sulfur, and mercury. But, said the Empress, if it be so, it will require an infinite multitude of saline particles to produce such a great quantity of ice, frost, and snow. Besides, said she, when snow, ice, and frost turn again into their former principle, I would fain know what becomes of those saline particles. But neither the worm men nor the fish and bird men could give her an answer to it.
I can give an answer either.
Then the Empress inquired of them the reason why springs were not as salt as the sea is, also why springs did ebb and flow. To which some answered that the ebbing and flowing of some springs was caused by hollow caverns within the earth, where the sea water crowding through did thrust forward and draw back the spring water according to its own way of ebbing and flowing. But others said that it proceeded from a small proportion of saline and acid particles, which the water imbibed from the earth. And although it was not so much as to be perceived by the sense of taste, yet was it enough to cause an ebbing and flowing motion. And as for the spring water being fresh, they gave, according to their observations, this following reason. There is, said they, a certain heat within the bowels of the earth, proceeding from its swift circular motion upon its own axis, which heat distills the rarest parts of the earth into a fresh and insipid water, which water being through the pores of the earth, conveyed into a place where it may break forth without resistance or obstruction, causes springs and fountains. Yeah, makes sense. And these distilled waters within the earth do nourish and refresh the grosser and drier parts thereof. This relation confirmed the Empress in the opinion concerning the motion of the earth and fixedness of the sun,
round.
as the birdmen had informed her. And then she asked the wormmen whether minerals and vegetables were generated by the same heat that is within the bowels of the earth. To which they could give her no positive answer. Only this they affirmed, that heat and cold were not the primary producing causes of either vegetable or minerals, or other sorts of creatures, but only effects. And to prove this our assertion, said they, we have observed that by change of some sorts of corporeal motions, that which is now hot will become cold, and what is now cold will grow hot. But the hottest place of all we find to be the centre of the earth. Neither do we observe that the torrid zone does contain so much gold and silver as the temperate, nor is there great store of iron and lead wheresoever there is gold, for these metals are most found in colder climates towards either of the poles. This observation the Empress commanded them to confer with her chemists, the ape men, to let them know what gold was not produced by a violent but a temperate degree of heat. She asked further whether gold could not be made by art. They answered that they could not certainly tell Her Majesty, but if it was possible to be done, they thought tin, lead, brass, iron, and silver to be the fittest metals for such an artificial transmutation.
Okay.
Then she asked them whether art could produce iron, tin, lead, or silver. They answered not in their opinion. Then I perceive, replied the Empress, that your judgments are very irregular, since you believe that gold, which is so fixed a metal, that nothing has found as yet which could occasion a dissolution of its interior figure, may be made by art, and not tin, lead, iron, copper, or silver, which are yet so far weaker and meaner metals than gold is. But the wormmen excused themselves, and they were ignorant in that art, and that such questions belonged more properly to the ape men, which were Her Majesty's chemists. So they were like, that's not our job.
Do you think she's going to go ask the ape men now?
I think she's going to go ask the ape men. Is she? Oh, she's not finished with these guys though. Then the Empress asked them whether by their sensitive perceptions they could observe the interior corporeal figurative motions both of vegetables and minerals. I thought they already did this. They answered they answered that their senses could perceive them after they were produced, but not before. Nevertheless, said they, although the interior figurative motions of natural creatures are not subject to the exterior animal sensitive perceptions, yet by their rational perception they may judge of them and of their productions if they be regular. Whereupon the Empress commanded the bearmen to lend them some of the best microscopes.
We're back on the microscope.
At which the bearmen smilingly answered Her Majesty that their glasses would do them but little service in the bowels of the earth, because there was no light. For, said they, our glasses do only represent exterior objects, according to the various reflections and positions of the light. And wheresoever light is wanting, the glasses will do no good. To which the wormmen replied that although they could not say much of refractions, reflections, inflections, and the like, yet were they not blind, even in the bowels of the earth, for they could see the several sorts of minerals and also minute animals that lived there, which,
Do you have a charger? I just realised I'm not on charge.
it.
No, I mean my laptop.
I haven't kicked anything out.
Oh, no, you haven't.
I was wondering.
There's a lot of wires
There's
going on
a lot of
behind the
wires.
scenes. I know it looks neat on camera.
Does it?
Let's just pull that one.
Yeah. Just...
Be very careful plugging it into that extension.
There we go.
Back in this
Where nothing
mode.
is not authentic.
Excellent.
Right, back in the zone. Back in the
I have no
zone.
idea where I was.
Wheresoever light is wanting, the glasses will do no good. To which the wormer replied,
That although they could not say much of refractions, reflections, inflections, and the like, yet were they not blind, even in the bowels of the earth, for they could see the several sorts of minerals, as also minute animals that lived there, which minute animals, creatures, were not blind neither, but had some kind of sensitive perception that was as serviceable to them as sight, taste, smell, touch, and hearing, etc., was to other creatures. By which it is evident that nature has been as bountiful to those creatures that live underground or in the bowels of the earth as to those that live upon the surface of the earth, or in the air or in water. But howsoever proceeded the wormmen, although there is little in the bowels of the earth,
light
yet,
in the bowels.
although there is little light in the bowels of the earth,
It doesn't say little anywhere.
is it not?
Yeah, there's little on the next line.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's start that sentence again.
Okay.
But howsoever proceeded the wormmen, although there is light in the bowels of the earth, yet your microscopes will do but little good here.
There we go.
By reason those creatures that live underground have not such an optic sense as those that live on the surface of the earth. Wherefore, unless you had such glasses as are proper for their perception, your microscopes will not be any ways advantageous to them. No.
Yeah.
To them, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like you'll have to take over soon. I'm starting
Yeah,
to lose
when we
it.
get to the next paragraph, which could be in 5 pages, 1 page.
The Empress seemed well pleased with this answer of the wormmen, and asked them further whether minerals and all the other creatures within the earth were colourless, at which question they could not forbear laughing. And when the Empress asked the reason why they laughed, "We most humbly beg your Majesty's pardon," replied they, "for we could not choose but laugh when we heard of a colourless body." "Why?" said the Empress. "Colour is only an accident, which is an immaterial thing and has no being of itself, but in another body. Those," replied they, "that informed your Majesty thus, surely their rational motions were very irregular. For how is it possible that a natural nothing can have a being in nature? If it be no substance, it cannot have a being, and if no being, it is nothing. Wherefore the distinction between subsisting of itself and subsiding in another body is there a nicety and nonsense. For there is nothing in nature that can subsist of or by itself, I mean singly, by reasons of all parts of nature are composed in one body, and though they may be infinitely divided, commixed, and changed in their particulars, yet in general parts cannot be separated from parts as long as nature lasts. Nay, we might as probably affirm that infinite nature would be as soon destroyed as that one atom could perish. And therefore your Majesty may firmly believe that there is no body without colour, nor no colour without body, for colour, figure, place, magnitude, and body are all but one thing, without any separation or abstraction from each other."
Making very bold claims here.
I know, right?
Did we learn anything in that segment? I'd say no.
I'd say no. I'd say
It's just a lot of musing. It's a lot of darting about points, which is, valuable. Is it valuable? Not sure if it is valuable. Right, here we go.
Yeah.
Anything more to say?
I don't know. I think I'm going to take a toilet break while you start there.
Are you?
Yeah. It's been a good hour and a half.
It's been an hour and a half.
So I'll be right back.
Okay. I'll let you pass.
Thank you. Do you want any water?
No, I'm good. I've got some. Do you want? Wait, I shouldn't carry on without you, should I?
I'm sure you can catch me up.
Yeah.
But feel free to recap.
No, I'll I'll go for it.
Okay.
You won't miss much, I'm sure.
But you have to turn so that the candles reflect in your spectacles.
Where would you like me to
I
be?
don't know.
Oh,
Not
okay.
so, there must be some.
Okay, here we go. The Empress was so wonderfully taken with this discourse of the worm men that she not only pardoned the rudeness they committed in laughing at first at her question, but yielded a full assent to their opinion, which she thought was the most rational that she had ever heard yet, and then proceeding in her questions, inquired further whether they had observed any seminal principles within the earth free from all dimensions and qualities which produce vegetables, minerals, and the like. To which they answered that concerning the seeds of minerals, their sensitive perceptions had never observed any, but the vegetables had certain seeds out of which they were produced. Then she asked whether those seeds of vegetables lost their species, that is, were annihilated in the production of their offspring. To which she answered that by an annihilation nothing they could be produced, and that the seeds of vegetables were so far from being annihilated in their productions that they did rather numerously increase and multiply. For the division of one seed, said they, does produce numbers of seeds out of itself. But replied the Empress, a particular part cannot increase of itself. 'Tis true, answered they, but they increase not barely of themselves, but by joining and commixing with other parts, which do assist them in their productions, and by way of imitation form or figure their own parts into such or such particulars. Then, I pray, inform me, said the Empress, what disguise those seeds put on, and how they do conceal themselves in their transmutations. They answers that seeds did no ways disguise or conceal, or rather divulge themselves in the multiplication of their offspring, but only they did hide and conceal themselves from the sensitive perceptions, so that in their figurative and productive motions were not perceptible by animal creatures. Again, the Empress asked them whether there were any non-beings within the earth, to which they answered that they had never heard of such a thing, and if their Majesty would know the truth thereof, she must ask those creatures that are called immaterial spirits, which had a great affinity with non-beings, and perhaps could give her a satisfactory answer to this question. Then she desired to be informed what opinion they had of the beginning of forms. They told Her Majesty that they did not understand what they meant by this expression, for, said they, there is no beginning in nature, no, not of particulars. By reason nature is eternal and infinite, and her particulars are subject to infinite changes and transmutations by virtue of their own corporeal, figurative self-motions, so there's nothing new in nature, nor properly a beginning of anything. The Empress seemed well satisfied with all those answers and inquired further whether there was no art used by those creatures that live within earth. Yes, answered they. For the several parts of the earth do join and assist each other in the composition or framing of such parts, of such or such particulars, and many times there are factions and divisions which call productions of mixed species, as for example weeds instead of sweet flowers or useful fruits, but gardeners and husbandmen often use to decide their quarrels and cause them to agree, which though it shows a kindness to the differing parties, and yet is a great prejudice to the worms and other animal creatures that live underground, for it most commonly cause their dissolution and ruin, and best they are driven out of their habitations. What, said the Empress, are not worms produced out of the earth? Their production in general, answered they, is like the production of all other natural creatures, proceeding from the corporeal figurative motions of nature, but as for their particular productions, they are according to the nature of their species. Some are produced out of flowers, some out of roots, some out of fruits, some out of ordinary earth. Then they are very ungrateful children, replied the Empress, that they feed on their own parents, which gave them life. Their life, answered they, is their own, and not their parents', for no part or creature of nature can either give or take away life, but parts do only assist and join with parts, either in the dissolution or production of other parts and creatures. After this, and several other conferences which the Empress held with the worm men, she dismissed them, and having taken much satisfaction in several of their answers, encouraged them in their studies and observations. She then made a convocation of their chemists the 8 men and commanded them to give her an account of the several transmutations which their art was able to produce. They begun first with a long and tedious discourse concerning the primitive ingredients of natural bodies and how by their art they had found the principles of which they consist. But they did not all agree in their opinions, for some said that the principles of all natural bodies were the 4 elements, fire, air, water, earth, out of which they were composed. Others rejected this elementary commixture and said there were many bodies out of which none of the 4 elements could be extracted by any degree of fire whatsoever, and that on the other side there were divers bodies whose resolution by fire reduced them into more than 4 different ingredients. And these affirmed that the only principles of the natural bodies were salt, sulfur, and mercury. Others again declared that none of the forementioned could be called the true principle of natural bodies, but that by their industry and pains which they had taken in the art of chemistry, they had discovered that all natural bodies were produced but from one principle, which was water. For all vegetables, minerals, and animals, said they, are nothing else but simple water, distinguished into various figures by the virtue of their seeds. But after a great many debates and conventions about this subject, the Empress, being so much tired that she was not able to hear them any longer, imposed a general silence upon them, and then declared herself in this following discourse: I am too sensible of the pains you have taken in the art of chemistry to discover the principles of natural bodies, and wish they had been more profitably bestowed upon some other than such experiments, both by my own contemplation and the observations which I have made by my rational and sensitive perception upon nature and her works. Hello, Fintan Kealy.
What have I missed?
You missed it. Well, it's
very
been.
warm in
It is quite. Shall I turn down the heater?
here. It's quite nice.
Yeah.
Well, a little bit maybe.
I don't really know how. There you go. So she's talking a lot about how life is made.
Oh.
And oh wait,